How the Bucks avoid back-to-back losses and start to make things interesting in the Eastern Conference. We dig into it on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia. You can hear me each and every game as a part of the Bucks Radio Network broadcast. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day, and in some cases your second as well, each and every day, for helping make the Locked On Network the number one sports podcasting network in the industry. So earlier today on our Wednesday show, Camille and I dug into Cam Thomas and the thought behind signing Cam Thomas, the addition there, some of the things the Bucks are going to have at their disposal this summer as well. And I think the most important takeaway from that is when you hear someone, and we know they're out there. I did a handful of interviews last week. I can't remember if I mentioned this on the show or not, where everybody kind of had the same line too of, well, we know there's not much the Bucks can do this summer, but, and had to correct them. You're going to continue to hear it. Just let people know it's false. They have picks they can trade. We can get into that and whether or not that's a good idea at a date to be determined here. But they do have picks they can trade. And they could go multiple routes. They have one expiring contract. They have another one that has an option after that. Both are of significant value that could bring back a large contract if combined together, or could be broken up and again use multiple draft picks to make separate trades where you could bring back more money in those trades because of the spot the Bucks are in cap wise. Again, even with the dead money from Damian Lillard on your books, they still have more wiggle room. And I haven't poured over this too much, but at first glance, my instinct is to say more wiggle room now than they've had since, 2019, probably, when you knew what you were getting into, basically keeping your guys and Chris Middleton notably and Malcolm Brogdon leaving. So they have more room now. It's not the same old, just veteran minimum deals that you can dole out. And about $30 million, we'll say, depending on what you do in terms of moves, that you can use to sign guys, whether it be on a biannual acceptance, and maybe that's already ticketed for a player that was just added, especially some of the things we heard from John Horst that Camille and I dug into. If you missed that, go check out today's show earlier in the day on Wednesday. Maybe there's already a thought in place or a plan potentially that Cam Thomas is here for the long haul. It's not just the rest of this season. It's a new contract in the offseason. And maybe that's the biannual exception. Maybe that's part of your non-taxpayer mid-level. But yeah, both of those things available, and potentially would only need to add 2 roster spots depending on player options and what you do in trades. So it is going to be, I would assume, a very, very busy and active offseason here for the Bucks. But how important is the offseason, and when is that offseason officially going to start for this team? That is an answer we may start to get this week. And I feel like we have gone over this several times already, and at the risk of once again painting the clown paint on my face, we do see it. And we may start to get our answer forcibly in terms of what happens in these wins and losses, or what happens to the schedule for the Bucks. Your win streak came to an end against Orlando. You ended up losing by 19 points. It was highly competitive, despite the Magic doing everything they could to give this to you in the first half of the game, are doing a lot. They still forced a lot of Bucks turnovers, and there were self-inflicted wounds, but Orlando allowed you to stay around. And then it wasn't until the final, really 3 minutes of the third quarter, before the wheels fell off. So can you avoid that? We didn't see Gary Trent Jr. in that game on Monday night, a DNP coach's decision for Gary Trent. And this was on the heels of some pretty good performances during that win streak. A big product of that was the shots that were made available to him. It's been a struggle this season for Gary Trent Jr. Nobody's going to try to say the opposite to that. It was encouraging to see him start to find some of that comfort zone, I guess I would say. So that was the interesting part. Okay, now that you add another 2-guard, all of a sudden Gary Trent Jr.'s minutes have disappeared. So we'll see what happens on that front. And maybe we won't even have an idea, because as we look at the injury report for tonight, a couple of things stand out. Number one, the Magic are still basically at full strength. Jet Howard is unavailable with an ankle sprain, but the first game between these two on Monday night, that was the message that we were getting from people around the Magic of, hey, here we come. We just got Franz Wagner back after a multi-game absence, and we're healthy for the first time essentially all year since opening night, that we're starting to get our health going in the right spot. And, for the Bucks, that's certainly not the case with no Giannis, still no Taurean Prince. And now for today's game, that remains unchanged. Alex Antetokounmpo is still out on G League assignment. Giannis still out recovering from a calf strain. Taurean Prince still out recovering from neck surgery. But there are also two new names that were added to this injury report for the Bucks, and one of them is more pressing than the other. And there's been some rumblings with that one and some things that we've heard about him and his health. So we'll get into that update and take a look at a busy night across the NBA as we get you set for this matchup tonight in Orlando. Round number 2 between the Bucks and the Magic. We'll check in on that after this. Time to talk to you about our friends over at Indeed. You've heard us talk about it many times here on the show. Hiring isn't just about finding someone that's willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help move your business forward. If you want candidates who match what you're looking for, well, Indeed Sponsored Jobs is the move, because instead of hoping the right person stumbles across your post, Indeed helps you match with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria, like skills, certifications, and location. If I were hiring, I wouldn't want just someone who can help. I would want someone with real experience who can do more than help. Jump right in. That's what you'll love about Indeed. You can get specific and target exactly what you need. It saves you time because you're spending less energy sorting through all of the mismatches. And with sponsored jobs, your post gets seen by candidates who are actually a fit. And here's a stat that should tell you it all. In the minutes I've been talking to you about companies like Indeed, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Those other two additions to the injury report. Pete Nance is on the injury report. He is questionable with a left ankle sprain. And I'm trying to remember if Pete Nance, he was not. So Pete Nance was not on the injury report for Monday. Franz Wagner and Wendell Carter were for the Magic. They both ended up playing. Colin Castleton was out on G League assignment. Colin Castleton remains out on G League assignment. So Pete Nance is questionable with a left ankle sprain. We'll keep an eye on that. And then Ryan Rollins is questionable with right foot plantar fasciitis. Questionable this close to the All-Star break with a back-to-back looming. Not to be the bearer of bad news, but I do take that as out for Ryan Rollins. We'll find out as we sit here and record this. It's just about in the afternoon, so we'll find out about 90 minutes from now from Doc Rivers when he meets with the media. But there was, I had heard some chatter going around too that Ryan Rollins and Camille and I talked earlier this morning too about some of the struggles you've seen in efficiency from Kevin Porter Jr. And I mean, again, I don't want to make it sound like we're piling onto either of these guys, but some frankly declines and regression that you've seen from Ryan Rollins, not just in recent games, but really up and down play. For every moment where you'd see not a great game from Ryan, or these numbers and the efficiencies kind of regressed, he would bounce back and put together a stretch of really good games. It's been up and down, and I started to hear some rumblings that there's a little bit of plantar fasciitis that he's battling through right now, so let's keep this in mind. And now I believe this is the first time we have seen it on the injury report, which shows you there's something that's there and something that obviously not gotten better. So you got back-to-back games. I mean, especially for a team that right now on the surface is on the outside looking in, the logical thing would just be to say, look, plantar fasciitis. I thankfully have never dealt with it, but rest is one of the things that gets it better. So we can basically get you a week and a half off here if you don't play tonight and don't play tomorrow night in Oklahoma City. I do wonder if that's the route we go. It does leave you incredibly thin in terms of your creators and ball handlers. At that point, it is basically Kevin Porter Jr. and Kyle Kuzma. And you just go back to Monday night in that game against the Magic, where to say the Bucks struggled to protect the basketball is putting it mildly. 20 turnovers, 10 in each of the two halves. And really the big difference was in the first half, Orlando scored 6 points off of those. In the second half, they scored 21 points off of those. Ryan Rollins did have 6 of turnovers in that game. Kyle Kuzma had 5. So if you're looking at the two guys that this is it for your creators and your facilitators at this point, they ended up between Kuzma and Kevin Porter Jr. with 8 of your 20 turnovers in that game. So if there is no Ryan Rollins, I do wonder, as Camille and I pondered this morning, is now the time that you see Cam Thomas already inserted into the starting lineup? And is that the role that you start to take on here for this group? But it figures to be a very different look for this team tonight and potentially leading into the All-Star break for this team. One last thing, too, that I do want to touch on, because this one started to spread quite a bit throughout the course of the day. We got one last bullet point to get to. We'll share that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena. You got the crowd, the energy, that moment. You get tickets, though? Did you? That's not always the easy part. Well, that's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, with the fans. Pull up the Game Time app, pick an upcoming NBA game, and you'll have tickets loaded within minutes. You see all-in pricing up front, so there's no surprise fees when you get to checkout. You can see the view from your seat, making buying even easier. They have zone deals where all you do is choose the section. Game Time picks the seats, and you end up saving. Great last-minute options, too, with NBA tickets showing up at solid prices, and everything feels quick, intuitive, and stress-free from start to finish. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Locked On for $20 off. No NBA. Use the code LOCKED ON and $20 off your first purchase. That is LOCKEDON to get $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not gametime.com. All right, so one last thing to touch on here, as we just said, there's going to be a summer full of change, it feels like, with this group. A couple of things to just let's start to sift through here. I'm still very curious about the Bucks trade deadline activity. I mean, I think it's always a dangerous preposition, but if we were to read between the lines, in listening to how John Horst described the acquisition of Cam Thomas and what they are focused on too. And again, we got on Courtside with the Milwaukee Bucks. You can find that entire interview on Bucks Plus. We got more of this message from Horst of we are focused on us. We are blocking out the outside noise. That's all it is vis-a-vis Giannis. We're focused on what we can do to improve this team right now, in the immediate future, for the future, all of that. That's our main focus. That was a message. And then also the future of Cam Thomas and what we liked about him, how we view this as a piece beyond just this year. If I can kind of summarize what he had to say, that was the other big takeaway. And, I had this conversation with a couple other people after the deadline on Thursday of, well, wait a minute. What am I missing here? You did Phoenix a solid. You helped them get under the luxury tax. You gave up the only two true expiring contracts that you had in order to do so. Like you could have still traded other contracts that were 1+1, that were veteran minimums, that were basically the same amount, especially when you factor in taking back more money. You could have done that, but you didn't. You gave away expiring contracts, and on the surface, the Mark Williams edition, you thought, what's the secondary move with another one of these bigs? Because I can't imagine they're going to carry four big men. I don't think Mark Williams would be viewed as your starting center, but Mark Williams is a capable rotational player in this league, and he's cost controlled. You're going to have to sign him in the offseason, but it's not going to be a $20 million deal. So, okay, I kind of get that, especially if it means there's another move coming. And then about, an hour or so later, we saw, well, there is, but Mark Williams isn't coming to Milwaukee. That other move is Ousmane Dieng. And, I mean, look, by the tools, there is a lot to like about Ousmane Dieng. It is rather interesting that we saw a DNP in his first game, which isn't surprising, to come over in the trade late Thursday, play game Friday. It's not a stunner that Ousmane Dieng did not play on Friday night. And you say, well, Cam Thomas signed and played, 24 hours later. Cam Thomas has also been in the league for 5 years, and you know what you're getting in Cam Thomas. So that part isn't surprising. But when you look at it and say, well, what are we getting out of this? Ousmane Dieng maybe, but we're going to have to wait and see. We're going to have to see if he plays this season and how much he plays, like how focused you are on developing him. His playing time is going to be a tell there, because you got a big decision to make. He is a free agent, and you're going to have to sign him for more than $6 million that he's currently making, because he was the number 11 pick in the draft. So I'm not quite sure about that one. But then the message that we heard from John Horst too about the future for Cam Thomas does lead you to believe a lot of this move was probably centered around, okay, maybe we have something. Maybe there's something we can develop here in Ousmane Dieng. But that's our secondary appeal. The big thing is, how do we create a roster spot and bring in Cam Thomas? Because it seemed like this didn't just pop up on Sunday. Now, are there other ways to create a roster spot than to trade two expiring contracts? I mean, sure, you could have just released one of those guys. You could have just released another guy that's not in that trade that's making a veteran minimum. You did get Ousmane Dieng in the deal, but again, let's see how much usage he gets and how much you actually develop him. The other thing is, did you get any compensation beyond that? Maybe I'm naive here, but if we are helping you get under the luxury tax, we did you a solid. So we're going to need something back here. And I've talked with two other people about this, of surely there's something I'm missing that hasn't been reported yet. Like, are we going to find out after the fact there were draft picks? Was there cash involved? I was told by one source they had heard there was cash that was sent over a deal by Phoenix, which I kind of find interesting, because it's kind of like the Michael Scott line from The Office of, well, we could have just paid for the pizzas. I mean, if you're Phoenix, you're trying to get under the tax to avoid paying money, and the way you're going to do that is to pay money. I found that to be interesting. I heard from another very, very well-placed source that no, there was nothing that came over, and we're still kind of trying to figure out what happened here, if this was just bungled, if there's part of a larger plan. Again, maybe it's, we do actually really like Ousmane Dieng and we're going to develop Cam Thomas, but it's very much TBD on that front. And the reason why I point this out is because, look, I think, and this isn't to relitigate the Giannis versus Shams thing and the national reporting perspective, but what I would say is just taking quote unquote trade report tweets and citing it as gospel is a very dangerous thing to do, because number one, it becomes, a lot of this stuff becomes a game of telephone, and there's only so many well-placed sources that get this type of stuff. And a lot of those sources aren't going with it immediately. Like, you'll start to hear some drips and drabs of it, but a lot of times it's after the fact, and you'll hear things that kind of connect the dots. So I would just be cautious with running with any of that and filtering out what the noise is. But I bring it up because there was a report earlier today that one of the breakdowns in the discussion between the Bucks and the Memphis Grizzlies for a Ja Morant trade, which I think at the very least we can acknowledge, look, there was definitely interest in the Bucks and Ja Morant, or in the Bucks had in Ja Morant. But one of those reports that came out was that, look, the Bucks were willing to part with Ryan Rollins, but wanted the Grizzlies to take back Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis, and Memphis had no interest in taking on either of those two. And, by the way, the Memphis Grizzlies were also unwilling to include any draft capital in the deal. I will just say this. I do not believe that to be true, and this is one of those trades reports that I say, don't always run with everything and cite it as gospel and say, well, this was clearly happening. Whether or not, you go back to speaking of Memphis, that wasn't the Brooks we were talking about, that type of game of telephone thing, or if it's just conjecture and kind of like, well, we know they had these conversations. What would get there? Let me add these things up. Oh, this would work. I think a lot of times you see that type of thing. I would frankly be stunned on everything I've heard if that report is in fact true, that the Bucks started this by dangling Ryan Rollins, because again, it is a front office and an organization that is very cognizant of how they got into this spot, the lack of that type of talent on that type of contract, and moving that. Number one, I don't know how much Memphis would have scoffed at that package, because one of those contracts becomes an expiring contract. Another one I think has value and is something you could rehab and get something out of in the case of Bobby Portis as well. So let's wait until one of the trusted sources has this confirmation. I'm going to poke around on it as well, but my initial inclination is this one is just not true. Okay, we gave you the show earlier today. Camille and I mentioned we were going to do this. We're going to start to break out the preview for the matchup separately in its own show in these settings. So tomorrow, Camille is going to take a look at the Oklahoma City Thunder. We may get the insider perspective from Rylan of Locked On Thunder, but she'll have that. And then tomorrow morning or late tonight, still TBD on the schedule, it's going to be Camille and I handle the post-game because unavailable. Camille and I will have the post-game recap of the Bucks and the Orlando Magic. That's going to do it for today's show. Again, thanks to every one of you for making this your first stop of the day. And to those of you especially that have signed up for the Everydayer Club, you get bonus episodes, ad-free episodes. You get access to the Discord channel as well. You can find the link to sign up if you are not in Everydayer and join that club in the episode notes of today's show. For those of you on video, we send you to the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. If you're on audio, make sure you find that show as well, Locked On NBA with NBA Game Nights. That'll do it for today's show. We'll talk with you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.